The morning air cut against her skin, biting at her cheeks and stirring the fine hairs along her neck. She hurried across the polished marble floors, tray clutched tightly in trembling hands. Every step felt too loud, too visible. Every eye in the hall seemed to track her, measuring her worth, judging her very existence. A misstep. A stumble. Silver bowls wobbled violently, tipping over with a harsh crash that echoed through the great hall. Gasps and whispered laughter swirled around her, sharper than the winter wind outside. Her heart leapt into her throat, shame flooding her chest in hot, bitter waves. The child she secretly cared for, a fragile little life not her own, peered from the corner of the corridor, wide-eyed and silent. She had promised to keep her safe, and yet, standing amid the derision of the household, she felt powerless. Invisible. A cruel laugh cut through the hall. Clumsy as ever, a servant hissed, eyes alight with delight at her humiliation. No wonder she serves only at the Alpha's feet. She belongs to no one, not even herself. The word stabbed deeper than any harsh hand or pointed finger. She bent to gather the fallen silver, hands trembling, chest tight with the weight of scorn. The child whimpered softly, tiny fingers brushing against the maid's skirts, a quiet reminder of the fragile life depending entirely on her vigilance. From the far end of the hall, he observed. The Alpha. Silent, imposing, a figure draped in power and untouchable authority. His gaze was unwavering, cool, and sharp, yet it carried something else, something protective, almost possessive. She could feel it even without his approach, a tether that tightened around her without a single word. The laughter and whispers faltered. Even the boldest of servants felt the tension of his presence. A tilt of his head, a subtle narrowing of eyes, and suddenly, the hall seemed to hold its breath. He noticed her. And the child. Clutching the last of the silver, she straightened, knees trembling. His eyes never left her, and with every subtle shift in his posture, she sensed the invisible barrier he cast, an unspoken warning to all who would dare harm her. The weight of his gaze was strange, magnetic, terrifying, yet comforting. The child pressed closer, sensing the protective aura he radiated. She lowered her eyes, uncertain whether to feel gratitude or fear. How could one man wield such control over a hall full of jeering voices without a single raised hand? She wanted to hide, to shrink into shadows where the child and she might remain unseen. But some small, stubborn part of her remained rooted, compelled by the pull of his silent scrutiny. He was aware of her struggles, of the quiet battles she fought each day to protect this child no one else seemed to care for. The echo of ridicule faded slowly, replaced by a new tension. His eyes followed her as she gathered the scattered silver, precise, calculating, protective. She did not understand why it unsettled her so completely, why she felt both terrified and strangely safe beneath his gaze. Her heart thumped, a mix of fear and a longing she could not name. She dared a glance toward him, but he remained unreadable, calm, distant. And yet, the air between them was charged, alive with something unspoken, a claim not yet made, a warning that no one else could cross him when it came to her. She drew the child closer, brushing a trembling hand over her hair, and for the first time that day, she let herself breathe. Somewhere in the shadows of this hall, in the silent power of a man she scarcely knew, a change had begun. Invisible no longer, she felt the first threads of recognition, fragile, dangerous, and entirely irreversible. The Alpha's eyes lingered, unwavering, a silent promise, or a silent threat. And in that quiet, unbroken tension, she sensed that nothing would ever be the same again. The hall had emptied, leaving only the faint echo of footsteps against the cold stone. She pressed the child closer to her chest, feeling the steady thrum of small heartbeats beneath her hand. Relief, brief and fragile, settled over her like a thin shawl. But it did not last. Somewhere behind her, a presence lingered, quiet, deliberate, inescapable. He was there. The Alpha. The memory of his gaze, unwavering and measured, haunted her even now. She could feel it in the subtle tension along her spine, in the way the air seemed heavier, charged, almost dangerous. She told herself it was only curiosity, only the instinct of a man who saw what others could not. But beneath that rationalization, a strange heat stirred, a blend of fear, gratitude, and something she dared not name. The servants had already begun to whisper. Their voices carried through the corridors, soft but cutting, like threads of silk against the skin. She lingers too long near him. The alpha seems different with her. Another added, a sly smirk in their tone. Perhaps she thinks she is more than a maid. Their words brushed against her back as she hurried through the quiet halls, each step reminding her of her lowly place, each whisper a dagger she could not dodge. And yet, in the periphery of those murmurs, she felt him move. Not visibly, but in that subtle, almost imperceptible way that spoke of control and awareness. The alpha had intervened once, quietly, during the humiliation, ensuring that the child and she were not truly harmed by the cruel laughter. Now, though his form remained distant, she sensed him again, watching, guiding, protecting, silent, relentless, unyielding. She paused in the library, hidden between tall shelves of leather-bound tomes. The child pressed closer, small fingers gripping her skirts. The warmth of that tiny presence reminded her why she endured the ridicule, why she bent beneath the weight of scorn and expectation. The alpha's protective gaze had made the burden bearable, though she did not dare to admit it even to herself. A soft creak from the corridor made her flinch, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to two things: the child in her arms, trembling, and the knowledge that he was near. The air around her seemed to shift, charged with the subtle magnetism of his presence. She had glimpsed this before, the way he could make the laughter stop, make the boldest servant hesitate, without lifting a hand. And now, even unseen, she felt it again. A tether, invisible yet unbreakable. Do not falter, a whisper of a thought seemed to brush her mind, though his lips had not moved. She could not tell if it was fear speaking, or the strange, unreal feeling that he was near enough to watch her every heartbeat. She swallowed, willing herself to appear calm, yet a flush of heat crept up her neck. The child stirred, soft whimpers brushing her ear. She lowered herself to the floor, pressing her lips to the small crown of hair, and for a fleeting moment, allowed herself to imagine a world where she and this child were safe, wholly safe, under the watch of the alpha. Safe from whispers, from scorn, from the judgment of the pack. And yet, the warmth of that thought was tempered with something darker. He was not hers. He had not claimed her. And though he watched, protective and possessive in ways she barely understood, she could not know the intentions behind that gaze. It was both shield and warning, both promise and threat. Every instinct in her body told her to retreat, to hide, to remain unseen. And yet, a deeper, quieter part of her, the part that dared to hope, wanted to linger under the silent weight of his attention. Hours passed like this. She moved through the castle with measured steps, hands never free of the child, eyes darting to shadows that might hold him, hearts trembling with the silent awareness of being observed. The whispers of servants became background music to a dance she did not choose but could not escape. And through it all, the alpha remained a presence without form, a guardian without words, a man whose claim over the maid and child was unspoken but undeniable. As night descended, bringing long shadows across the stone floors, she allowed herself a quiet moment by the hearth. The child slept lightly against her chest, small breaths warm against her neck. She thought of him then, the alpha, the silent protector, the storm at the edge of her life. The memory of his gaze made her chest tighten, not with fear alone, but with an impossible curiosity, an aching question she could not voice. Why him? Why her? Why this child who was not his, yet seemed to stir something in him she could not name? Outside, the wind howled against the castle walls, but inside, the quiet tension remained. His eyes, his attention, lingered somewhere beyond the warmth of the hearth, and she felt it in every shiver, every tremble, every heartbeat of the small life she vowed to protect. A silent promise, a silent claim, a silent fire. She was noticed. She was marked, in ways she could not yet understand, and it both terrified and comforted her in equal measure. And so she remained, vigilant and trembling, caught between fear and longing, between the cruel whispers of the pack and the quiet, possessive presence of a man who might one day make her belong to him. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the distant hills, spilling a golden haze across the palace gardens. She moved among the trimmed hedges and stone pathways, the child's small hand curled tightly in hers. Every step she took was careful, deliberate, as if one wrong move could shatter the fragile illusion of safety she had created. The garden was quiet, save for the soft rustle of leaves and the distant calls of birds settling for the night. She drew a shaky breath, allowing herself a fleeting moment of peace. Yet even here, in the open air and fading light, she felt it, the unmistakable weight of him. The Alpha. He had followed, though silently, unseen by others, his presence almost ethereal. She did not dare glance up, though her instincts screamed that he was near. She sensed the way the air shifted when he drew closer, the subtle tightening in her chest that came with his proximity. Protective, commanding, unyielding, he was both her shield and her storm. The child's tiny fingers clutched at her skirts, eyes wide with awe at the garden's expanse. She pressed her lips to the top of the child's head, inhaling the faint scent of hair washed with lavender, and felt the weight of responsibility settle firmly upon her shoulders. This child, so small and delicate, had no place in the harsh hierarchy of the pack, yet she had vowed to guard her, no matter the cost. A shadow shifted near the edge of the fountain. She froze, breath caught in her throat, as the Alpha stepped into view, tall and imposing, yet somehow softened by the warm light of sunset. His eyes, dark and unyielding, fixed on her with a quiet intensity. He said nothing, yet the weight of his gaze spoke volumes. He knew. He knew of the child, of her devotion, of the precarious thread upon which their safety balanced. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to ask why he watched over them, but words faltered on her tongue. Instead, she kept moving, tending to the small task she had set for herself in the garden. Straightening potted plants, brushing fallen leaves from pathways, as if the mundanity of motion could mask the rapid beating of her heart. He watched. Always watching. Every time she shifted, every hesitant glance she cast around the garden, she could feel his awareness, like a tether she could not sever. The child, sensing the tension, pressed closer to her, small breaths warm against her arm, and she felt the Alpha's protective aura extend to both of them. A shiver ran down her spine, half fear, half something far more dangerous. Curiosity, longing, the faint stirrings of something she dared not name. Without warning, he moved closer, just enough to block the view of the distant servants who had wandered too near. She felt the air change, thick with unspoken intention. His presence was not just protection. It was possession, quiet but absolute. She lowered her gaze, cheeks burning under the intensity of it, and the child nestled against her side, unaware but comforted. He did not speak. He did not need to. In the silence, she felt the story of their connection unfold, his vigilance, his unspoken promise, the subtle insistence that they were under his care, whether they wanted it or not. And though she was painfully aware of her low status, of the scorned eyes that lingered in distant corridors, she allowed herself the briefest, most forbidden thought, that maybe, here in the quiet of the garden, she belonged to someone. A gust of wind rustled through the leaves, carrying with it the scent of wildflowers and earth, and she felt the weight of the day lift slightly. He remained near the edge of the fountain, calm and watchful, his shadow stretching long and protective across the stone paths. The child's hand remained in hers, small and trusting, and for the first time, she allowed herself a flicker of hope. Hope that they might survive the cruelty of others. Hope that she might protect the child without faltering. And hope, dangerous, undeniable hope, that the Alpha's silent possessiveness was not only for the child, but perhaps, quietly, for her as well. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the garden, and she felt the evening chill creep in. Yet in the warmth of his unseen presence, she did not shiver. Not fully. Not when the Alpha's eyes, dark and steady, never left them. And somewhere deep within, she realized that being noticed, being guarded, being claimed, even quietly, was a fire she could not extinguish. The hallways of the palace had grown quieter, the last of the servants retreating to their quarters as dusk settled across the stone walls. She moved swiftly, careful to keep the child close, every step measured, every breath wary. The laughter and whispers from the morning still echoed faintly in her mind, sharp reminders of her lowly place. She had done nothing wrong, yet the world seemed determined to remind her that she belonged to no one. But he was there. Always there. She could feel him before she saw him, a presence that both calmed and unnerved her. The Alpha's gaze followed her movements, subtle but undeniable, a tether of control and protection that she could neither avoid nor resist. As she straightened the child's shawl, she noticed it. The way the Alpha had shifted the arrangement of the servants' quarters, ensuring that none of them could approach too closely. A tray left carelessly in a corridor was moved to prevent her stumbling. A mischievous dog that might have tripped her was gently corralled by unseen hands. His influence was everywhere, invisible yet precise, protective in ways no one else could comprehend. Her heart raced, not with fear alone, but with a strange, unnameable longing. He had not spoken to her yet, not directly, but his actions said more than any words could. He had begun to assert a silent claim over both her and the child, and the realization pressed against her chest like the weight of an unfamiliar crown. She tried to ignore it. She told herself that she was only a maid, unworthy of attention, incapable of imagining that a man like him could ever consider her more than a servant. And yet, every glance she felt, every subtle shift of his posture in the shadows, reminded her of the truth. He had noticed, and he would not look away. The servants had begun to notice too. Whispers passed from one corridor to the next, subtle, cautious. "Have you seen how he watches her?" one murmured. "Even the alpha seems protective." Another added, quieter, as if afraid of being overheard, "It's as if she belongs to him already." Her cheeks burned with shame, embarrassment, and a flicker of something else, a dangerous, aching curiosity. Could she truly belong to someone like him? Could she dare imagine that the Alpha King, feared and untouchable, might claim her as fiercely as he protected the child? The child tugged at her sleeve, small eyes wide, and she knelt to meet her gaze, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. The little one's trust and reliance were a tether that anchored her to the world, even as the Alpha's presence loomed around them both, unseen yet undeniable. She felt it in the tension of her muscles, in the careful way she moved through the halls, in the small, careful gestures she made to shield the child from view. A shadow moved in the corner of her eye. He was closer now, stepping lightly along the corridor, silent as a predator yet controlled, deliberate, a figure of quiet dominance. She dared not meet his gaze, not fully, but she felt it brushing against her from the periphery. Watchful, possessive, protective. No words passed between them. None were needed. The unspoken claim, the quiet insistence of his control, filled the space between them. Every servant who dared glance her way faltered under the invisible weight of his attention. Every scornful whisper seemed to die as he passed. The power dynamic was no longer subtle, it had shifted, bending the world around her. She swallowed, trembling, heart pounding with an intoxicating mixture of fear, awe, and longing. She could feel the stirrings of something she had never allowed herself to consider. A connection, a promise, a possession that went beyond duty, beyond protection. And even as the reality of her lowly status pressed against her chest, she could not deny the pull, the magnetic draw of being seen, of being claimed, even in silence. The child nestled closer, soft breaths warm against her arm, and she allowed herself the faintest exhale. Somewhere in the shadows, he lingered, watching, guarding, asserting his dominance without words. And she knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that nothing, no whispers, no ridicule, no harsh world, could sever the silent tether he had drawn between them. The corridors of the palace seemed to hold their breath, waiting. And so did she, caught between fear and fascination, shame and longing, wondering when, or if, he would ever make his unspoken claim known in words, rather than in the quiet, dangerous language of glances and protection. The morning had arrived pale and still, a mist clinging to the palace grounds like a shroud. She moved quietly through the corridors, the child's small hand tight in hers, each step measured, careful, cautious. The hush of dawn brought no relief. She knew eyes always lingered, watching, judging, waiting for the smallest misstep. The child's soft whimper caught her attention. She glanced down, heart tightening. The little one had spotted a figure lingering near the servants' quarters, a man whose intent was not kind. Fear coiled around her chest as she realized what might come. Another servant, jealous and cruel, had noticed her secret. Her secret that the child depended upon. Her heart pounded. She held her breath, clutching the child closer, eyes scanning for escape, for anyone who might intervene. But the moment stretched, heavy with threat, and her body refused to move. That's when she felt it, the Alpha's presence, impossible to ignore. He appeared silently, like a shadow slipping between the columns, his eyes sharp, calculating, a predator who had caught the scent of danger before it could strike. One step, two, and he was between her and the threat, the sheer weight of him pressing an unspoken warning into the air. The other servant faltered, gaze dropping, sweat prickling at the base of their skull as they realized the silent force they had invoked. The Alpha's hand moved just slightly, not threateningly, not violently, but in a way that made clear who held power in this space. Every inch of his stance radiated control, authority, and unyielding protectiveness. She felt it in the rise and fall of her own chest, in the heat that coiled low in her stomach, in the trembling of the child's tiny fingers against hers. He did not speak. His silence was more terrifying than words could have been. The servant backed away, defeated without a confrontation, the tension dissipating only when the Alpha's gaze finally slid back to her. In that glance, she saw awe, a subtle acknowledgement of the child she had cared for in secret, and a quiet, possessive warning. No one would harm them while he remained near. She sank to her knees, gathering the child into her arms. Relief washed over her in shaky waves, mixed with fear and awe. How could one man command such silent authority? How could he protect them so completely without uttering a single word? She pressed her face against the child's hair, inhaling the warmth, the softness, and allowed herself a fleeting moment of comfort, though her heart remained tight with lingering tension. He remained nearby, watching, his posture relaxed yet lethal in its subtle dominance. Even in his calm, she could sense the fire beneath his control, the same fire that had saved them, silently, from danger. It was awe-inspiring, terrifying, and strangely comforting. The child stirred, murmuring softly in her arms, and she realized that this quiet moment of safety was a fragile thing, a brief reprieve from the harshness of the world outside these walls. Yet, under the Alpha's vigilant presence, it felt possible, almost real, to imagine life without fear, without whispers, without threat. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the child's hair, and a thought struck her sharply. He was not merely protecting the child. He was claiming them, in ways he did not need to explain, in ways that demanded recognition. His attention was singular, focused, and unnerving. She felt seen, not as a servant, not as someone insignificant, but as someone worthy of guarding, someone whose very survival mattered to him. Her breath hitched, and she lowered her gaze, cheeks flushed with a heat she could not name. She did not understand the emotions swirling within her, fear, admiration, longing, gratitude, but she knew they were potent, inescapable. And somewhere deep, a quiet pulse of realization. This man, the Alpha, had drawn an unspoken line. A line between those who belonged under his protection and those who did not. And she, and the child, were irrevocably on the side he had chosen. The mist outside thickened, curling around the columns and hedges of the garden beyond, but within the quiet of the hall, warmth lingered. The Alpha's presence, unyielding and protective, wrapped around them like a shield. She breathed in, steadying herself, and whispered softly to the child, "You are safe. We are safe, for now." He remained nearby, silent and unwavering, a shadow and a guardian all at once. And she realized, with both awe and fear, that safety under him was not casual. It was deliberate, possessive, and absolute. And for the first time, she allowed herself to feel it, not just the relief of protection, but the dangerous, intoxicating weight of being seen, guarded, and claimed. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting golden patterns across the library floor. She knelt among stacks of old books, brushing dust from leather-bound spines, the child curled beside her, half asleep with soft breaths rising and falling in rhythm with her own. The quiet should have been comforting, but her thoughts were anything but still. He was there. She felt it before she saw him, the subtle shift in the air, the almost imperceptible tension that signaled his presence. The Alpha. Silent, calm, but closer than ever. She dared not raise her eyes, though the faint warmth of his watchful gaze pressed against her from across the room, grounding and unsettling all at once. A shadow fell over the child, and instinctively, she stepped forward, protective. But he made no move to speak, no gesture to reassure, yet the tension in the room did not crack. He watched, unyielding, and in that silence, he said more than words ever could. Her heart hammered, a mixture of fear, reverence, and curiosity curling tight inside her chest. Every motion he made was deliberate, calculated, a quiet demonstration of power and care. He adjusted a chair, shifted a stack of books to clear her path, all with subtlety so precise it almost felt invisible, but she felt it. Every act spoke of him, his awareness, his possessive guardianship. She dared a glance, careful and cautious, and caught the smallest shift in his expression. For a heartbeat, just a heartbeat, his lips twitched, almost imperceptibly. Not a smile, not a gesture, just the faintest hint that he acknowledged her burdens, her care for the child, her small acts of courage in a world that saw her as nothing. Her breath caught. Could he truly see her, the real her, beneath the maid's uniform, beneath the whispers and ridicule? Could he see the child, too, and understand why she risked everything to keep her safe? The Alpha's presence was a silent confession, a language without words that pressed against her heart with dangerous insistence. The child stirred, murmuring softly, and she bent to smooth the hair back from her face. He did not move to interrupt, did not speak, yet she felt the unspoken message as clearly as if he had whispered it aloud. I see you. I know what you endure. You are under my watch, whether you understand it or not. Her hands trembled slightly, brushing the child's shoulder, and she dared to wonder, what it meant for her. Not just protection, but recognition. Not just guardianship, but attention so precise and unwavering that it felt almost possessive. The weight of it pressed against her chest, and she could not decide if it terrified her more or thrilled her. For a long moment, the three of them, the maid, the child, and the silent Alpha, remained in that quiet orbit, bound together by unspoken truths. She dared not speak. He had not spoken. And yet, in that silence, confessions passed between them in the language of glances, of careful gestures, of shared presence. He shifted slightly, drawing the air around him taut with restrained power, and her pulse quickened. There was loneliness there, too, a sense of isolation, a man burdened by duty and expectation, by his own unspoken needs. She sensed the obsession in his gaze, not the fiery, blinding desire of the reckless, but the careful, unyielding focus of one who claimed silently, who observed, who protected. She lowered her eyes again, cheeks flushed, heart pounding with the weight of his attention. She did not understand the intensity, the possessiveness, the quiet obsession that had begun to define their interactions. But she felt it. She felt it in every protective gesture, every shadowed step, every unspoken warning to those who would dare threaten the child or her. The room was still, the golden light fading slowly into the muted tones of evening. She whispered softly to the child, "We are watched. We are safe, for now." Yet even as she spoke, her voice trembled with uncertainty. Safe, yes, but by a force she did not yet fully understand. By a man who claimed, who observed, who could never be dismissed. And in that quiet, golden light, she realized, perhaps for the first time, that the Alpha's confessions, though silent, were not without meaning. They carried truth, obsession, and care, a tether stronger than chains, invisible yet undeniable. She was seen. She was known. And though words had not been spoken, she could feel it in her bones. Their bond was beginning to form, fragile and dangerous, yet impossible to deny. The quiet of the evening was shattered by a whisper, soft, deliberate, and poisonous. She had thought the day's dangers behind them, that the Alpha's watchful presence had kept them safe. But betrayal, she learned, could move more silently than any shadow, slipping into the corners of the palace where even he could not always reach immediately. A trusted ally had spoken too freely. Rumors, twisted and sharpened, wound through the household like a serpent, coiling around ears willing to listen, ready to strike. The maid's secret, her care for the child, her hidden devotion, was no longer hers alone. Whispers reached the wrong ears, and suddenly the fragile sanctuary she had tried to build trembled. The child clung to her skirts, small hands trembling, eyes wide with fear. She pressed the little one close, heart hammering as she realized what might come next. Exposure meant ridicule, expulsion, even the possibility of the child being taken. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum in her chest. Then, from the shadows, he appeared. The Alpha. His presence was sudden, sharp, and overwhelming. She felt it immediately. The tension, the raw dominance, the unspoken warning that anyone who dared approach now risked consequences they could not imagine. His gaze swept the room, dark and calculating, as if he had smelled the betrayal before it fully revealed itself. The betrayer, a servant she had trusted, stumbled under his silent scrutiny. The room seemed to shrink, air thick with the weight of his authority. He did not speak, yet his intentions were as clear as steel. Every muscle in his body radiated danger and control. Every servant who had dared to whisper now faltered, aware of the unspoken threat that hung like a blade in the air. She wanted to step forward, to beg, to explain, but her voice refused. The Alpha had taken the mantle of protector, and she realized in a breathless moment of clarity that she need not speak. He would act. He always did. And she, for once, could simply stand back, powerless yet safe. The servant faltered, their eyes wide, knowing too late that they had invoked a force beyond understanding. The Alpha's movements were deliberate, slow, yet imbued with lethal precision. No one needed to witness the small gestures, the tightening of a jaw, the slight tilt of his shoulders, the way his gaze zeroed in on the offender, to understand that retribution was imminent. The child whimpered softly, and she lowered herself, pressing her lips to the small crown of hair, drawing strength from the fragile warmth she held. The Alpha did not remove his gaze from them, his protection absolute, his possessiveness clear even without a word. The betrayal had revealed what she had only begun to sense. He claimed them both. In the shadows, in the whispers, in every subtle act of dominance, he had made his claim. A hush fell over the room. The Alpha's attention was like iron, unyielding and heavy. The servant stammered, stumbled, and finally retreated, leaving a fragile silence in their wake. She dared not look up at him, though she felt the intensity of his watchful gaze pressing into her like heat. She could feel his frustration, his anger, and above all, his possessive insistence that no one else could touch what he had marked as his to protect. Her hands shook, and the child nestled closer, sensing the tension as acutely as she did. She realized then that the Alpha's silent confessions, his subtle but unyielding protection, were not merely gestures. They were a promise, a bond, a declaration without words. They were his possession as much as his protection. And in that quiet, heavy space, she understood something new. Betrayal could reveal truths as sharply as danger could. He was watching, always watching, guarding not only the child, but her as well, with an intensity that left no doubt. No one could harm them, not while he remained, not while he claimed them so utterly. For the first time in her life, she felt both vulnerable and untouchable. Vulnerable because she depended on his protection, untouchable because she had been claimed, and he would not let go. Fear, gratitude, awe, and a dangerous, unnameable longing tangled in her chest, and she pressed the child closer, aware that their lives had shifted irrevocably under the weight of his quiet, possessive vigilance. The shadows of the hall deepened, stretching long across the walls, yet she felt the heat of his presence like a shield. And in that darkness, she knew the truth. Betrayal had drawn him closer, forced him to act, and in doing so, he had made clear that she and the child were no longer merely dependents, they were his. The halls of the palace seemed to hold their breath. The morning sun cast long, pale beams across the marble floors, but the warmth of the light did nothing to soothe the tension that clung to the air. She moved quickly, keeping the child close, every step measured, every glance wary. She had survived the whispers, the betrayal, and the silent threats, but she knew the Alpha was preparing something. He appeared without warning, stepping from the shadows with a calmness that belied the storm simmering beneath his composure. The servants around them fell back instinctively, sensing the raw authority in his presence. He did not speak at first, letting the silence stretch, heavy and oppressive, until it pressed against every soul in the hall. Her heart raced. The child pressed close to her, small fingers gripping her skirts. She could feel the Alpha's focus, precise, unrelenting, aimed squarely at the one who had betrayed her. There was no hesitation, no wavering. His power was absolute, and every subtle motion radiated a warning that was as dangerous as any blade. The betrayer stepped forward, trying to mask fear with defiance. They began, voice trembling, but it faltered under the weight of his gaze. The Alpha's eyes, dark and unyielding, pinned them in place. It was not a gaze that sought to explain, to negotiate, or to reason, it was a claim. Every fiber of his being declared, "You will not harm them. You will not touch what belongs to me." The hall seemed to shrink around them. Every servant who had dared whisper or sneer now cowered at the edges, aware that this confrontation was beyond their interference. He moved deliberately, each step measured, commanding, a storm contained within the calm of a king. He spoke, low and steady, each word a blade. "You have chosen poorly." No further explanation was needed. The Alpha's presence alone carried judgment. His lips pressed into a thin line, eyes narrowing, and the betrayer faltered, stumbling backward, every instinct screaming to flee. She clutched the child to her chest, her pulse a frantic rhythm in her ears. She had never seen him like this, controlled, yet undeniably dangerous. Possessive. Every subtle gesture radiated dominance, but also an unspoken protection, a silent declaration that he would not tolerate threats to what he guarded. The Alpha's attention shifted briefly to her, dark eyes softening for the smallest, fleeting heartbeat. It was the first acknowledgement beyond mere protection, a recognition of her fear, her courage, her unwavering care for the child. In that glance, she felt the dangerous edge of his possessiveness, a thrill and a terror that left her breathless. The betrayer, now fully aware of the consequences, fled from the hall, stumbling over the polished floors, whispers of fear trailing behind them. And yet, even as silence returned, the tension lingered, thick and unyielding. He did not relax, did not turn away. His presence remained a shield and a tether, a quiet insistence that she and the child were his to guard, his to claim. The child whimpered softly, and she lowered herself, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of the small head. She realized then that the Alpha's possessiveness was not just a matter of power, it was deeply personal, intimately tied to his care, his obsession, and his sense of justice. She had been marked by him, in ways both terrifying and reassuring. For a long moment, they remained in the hall, the three of them bound by silence and attention. She could feel the pulse of his power around them, steady and unyielding, and she understood something new. His protection was absolute. His claim, though quiet, was undeniable. No one could harm them, not while he stood, not while he watched. Her hands trembled, and she pressed the child closer. Fear, gratitude, awe, and a dangerous, unnameable longing coiled tightly within her. She dared not speak, not yet, but in the depth of her chest, she felt it. She was seen, she was guarded, and she was, dangerously, irrevocably, his. The Alpha finally stepped back, though his gaze never left them. The hall was silent, but the echoes of his possessive power lingered. Every servant who remained knew their place. And she, holding the child close, understood that life would never be the same. The Alpha had drawn the line, and they were on the side he had chosen. The morning air was thick with frost, crisp and unyielding, as she hurried through the palace corridors with the child clutched tightly in her arms. The Alpha's absence pressed down on her chest like a physical weight, a void that made every step feel heavier than the last. She could still feel the remnants of his gaze, lingering like fire on her skin, but he was not here. Not yet. The decree had come swiftly, an order she could not resist. Political scheming, they whispered, demanded that she be confined to a distant wing of the castle until the matter of the child's safety could be decided. The child's hand trembled in hers, small fingers gripping her skirts as if to anchor them both to a fleeting sense of security. Her own heart thudded painfully, every beat echoing the fear and helplessness that clawed at her. The halls were cold, echoing with the quiet whispers of servants and courtiers who had not yet learned to respect her presence. She kept her head low, face pale, moving as though the world itself might crumble beneath her feet. She dared not hope that he would intervene this time, not openly, not before the eyes of the pack. The Alpha's control could protect her in the hallways, could silence the cruelest whispers, but he could not always fight the politics that sought to separate her from him. As she approached the wing she had been assigned, her chest tightened. The child nestled closer, small breaths warm against her arm, and she whispered words she did not entirely believe herself. "We will be safe. I hope." Hope. A fragile thing, so easily shattered in a world that had already tried to take everything from her. Night had begun to fall when the door to her temporary chamber closed behind them with a soft, final click. The room was sparse, unfamiliar, and silent. She sank to the floor, the child pressed against her chest, and let herself finally shiver. The tears she had held back pooled behind her eyes, threatening to spill, and she pressed her lips to the child's hair, tasting the faint scent of lavender and the faint warmth that had always been her anchor. And then, impossibly, she felt it, like a shadow slipping through the walls, brushing against the edges of the room, a presence she could not see but could sense with every heartbeat. The Alpha. He had come, of course. Always watching, always guarding, even when the walls of politics and distance tried to keep them apart. But this time, he could not reach her completely. Not yet. Her chest tightened further, a mixture of longing, fear, and frustration that made it hard to breathe. She had been claimed, she knew that now. But being claimed did not prevent separation, did not fill the void left by his absence. The helplessness of it pressed down like stone. She rocked the child gently, whispering soft, comforting words, though her own voice trembled with despair. Outside the window, the night deepened, stars glimmering faintly against the velvet darkness. She imagined him somewhere beyond these walls, standing in silent vigilance, possessed with the same unwavering focus he had always shown. She imagined his eyes scanning the halls for any threat, his hand poised to strike, his presence wrapping the child and her in invisible armor. And yet, the distance between them was real, harsh, and unyielding. Her mind reeled with longing. She wanted him beside her, wanted to feel the weight of his gaze, the quiet possessiveness that both terrified and thrilled her. She wanted to know, in this moment of fear and separation, that she mattered not only to the child but to him as well. But she could only imagine, could only hope, could only wait. Hours passed in quiet despair, marked by the small, rhythmic breaths of the child and the relentless ache in her chest. Each passing moment was a test of endurance, a reminder of the fragility of their connection when forced apart. Yet beneath the fear, beneath the longing, a spark of defiance remained. She had survived ridicule, betrayal, and threats before. She could survive this. And in the shadows of the chamber, where the night pressed close and cold against the window panes, she promised herself something fierce and unspoken. She would endure. She would protect the child. She would survive. And when he returned, when the Alpha, her unseen guardian, claimed them fully, they would be together again, unbroken, untouchable. The night stretched long, but her resolve hardened. Separation could wound, could terrify, could test the bond between them, but it could not undo it. Somewhere beyond these walls, he waited. She felt it as surely as the cold pressed against the glass. The Alpha's presence was never far, and the tether he had drawn around her and the child would not be broken, no matter how cruel the world became. The grand hall was alive with whispers, the heavy murmur of the pack echoing against high ceilings and polished floors. The servants' eyes flicked toward her at every step, some filled with curiosity, others with thinly veiled judgment. She moved carefully, the child's small hand tightly clasped in hers, every sense alert to the scrutiny surrounding them. She felt the shift in the air long before he appeared. A silence fell, subtle but absolute, as if the hall itself recognized his presence. The Alpha entered quietly, yet every head turned, every murmur halted. His form was commanding, regal, the sheer weight of him filling the space with a quiet authority that brooked no challenge. Her pulse raced. The child pressed closer, sensing the unspoken tension and the power radiating from him. She could feel it too, the possessiveness, the quiet insistence that what was his could not be touched by anyone else. He did not speak immediately. He did not need to. Every subtle movement, every steady step toward her and the child, carried a message as clear as any declaration. They are mine. The pack watched, some with awe, some with barely concealed envy. Those who had whispered, who had doubted, who had tried to manipulate and divide, now fell silent. The Alpha's gaze swept over them, piercing, measured, leaving no doubt as to where his loyalties lay. He stopped before her, and the hush deepened. She could feel the heat of his presence, the quiet storm behind his eyes. It was protective, possessive, absolute. The murmurs of the crowd seemed to fade into insignificance, leaving only the Alpha, the child, and her. "You will speak of nothing that does not belong to you," he said, his voice low, steady, carrying effortlessly across the hall. "You will not touch her. You will not touch the child. They are under my protection, and my claim is unbroken." Every eye turned to the accused, every whisper swallowed in fear. His words were sharp, final, unyielding. The pack understood then, without question, the depth of his possession and the lengths to which he would go to enforce it. The maid, though trembling, felt a warmth bloom in her chest. For the first time, the protection she had known in shadows and silence was spoken aloud, recognized openly, made public. She dared to lift her eyes to him, meeting the dark, unwavering gaze that had haunted her dreams and fears alike. There was no cruelty there, no arrogance, only calm dominance and fierce care, a man asserting his claim with a quiet, terrifying authority. Her breath hitched. She had been claimed, and the world could see it. The child's tiny hand squeezed hers, and she pressed a gentle kiss to the top of the small head, whispering softly, "We are safe." And now, finally, the truth of it was visible to all. Safe. Guarded. Claimed. Even as the murmurs of the pack resumed, subdued and respectful, she felt something shift deep within her. Fear and shame, once constant companions, melted beneath awe and relief. The Alpha's claim was not just for protection. It was a declaration of ownership, of care, of recognition. She existed in his world, no longer invisible, no longer powerless. He extended a hand, not to dominate, but to guide, and she allowed herself to take it, the child pressed between them. In that gesture, simple yet profound, the hall witnessed the beginning of something more than safety. It was acknowledgement. It was possession. It was the unspoken promise of devotion, made visible at last. And as the Alpha's presence settled around them, a shield both fierce and gentle, she realized the truth. She was no longer a mere maid. She was claimed, protected, and seen. Her life, and the child's, had shifted irreversibly under the weight of his authority and care. The world had witnessed it, and no one could deny it. The hall remained silent for a heartbeat longer, heavy with recognition. Then, slowly, the pack's members began to bow, to step aside, to acknowledge what they could not challenge. The Alpha's possessive claim was absolute, and she felt it deep in her bones, was finally safe to breathe, to exist, to hope. The child stirred, small fingers brushing hers, and she allowed herself a tentative smile, faint but full of relief. The danger had not vanished entirely. There were still whispers, still envy, but the unspoken bond that had tied them together was now visible, undeniable, and unbreakable in the eyes of all who had doubted. She took a steadying breath, leaning slightly into him, feeling the quiet weight of his protection. She was claimed. She was seen. And in the depths of her chest, a flicker of something dangerous and thrilling stirred. She was, finally, his. The evening was quiet, the grand halls now emptied of all but the servants necessary to maintain the palace's stillness. Outside, the moon hung low, silver and serene, casting delicate patterns of light across the polished floors. She moved through the corridors with the child nestled safely against her chest, but this time her steps were lighter, her chest less burdened. The weight of the Alpha's public claim still lingered, a warmth that eased the constant tension she had carried for so long. He appeared then, as if drawn to her instinctively, the faintest echo of movement preceding him. She had grown accustomed to his sudden appearances, but tonight, the intensity of his gaze caught her breath in a way it never had before. The Alpha's eyes, dark and fathomless, held a possessiveness she could no longer deny, fierce, tender, and utterly consuming. "Come," he said softly, a single word that carried authority yet gentleness. The command was not harsh, it was inevitable, and she found herself obeying without question. The child clung to her, sensing the change, and she adjusted her hold instinctively. They moved to a small chamber tucked away from the main wings, one she had only ever glimpsed before. It was warm, lit by a flickering fire, the soft glow dancing across the walls. The child, tired from the day's events, had already begun to drift toward sleep in her arms. She placed the little one gently on a low cot, brushing hair from the small forehead. The child murmured, curling into blankets, and she allowed herself a small exhale, her hands lingering in the warmth of the room. He remained standing near the doorway, his presence filling the space, his gaze unwavering. She felt the pull of it, magnetic and heavy, the possessiveness in every measured step he took toward her. When he finally knelt, it was deliberate, controlled, his hands reaching for hers, not demanding, but claiming, holding. "You are mine," he said, voice low, smooth, carrying both warning and intimacy. Not as a threat, not as a boast, but as truth. She felt it in her bones, in the tremor of her chest, in the quickened pulse beneath her skin. The words were simple, yet they struck with a force that left her breathless. Her hands, trembling slightly, rested in his, and she dared to look into his eyes. There was no arrogance there, no cruelty, only a fierce devotion, a quiet obsession tempered by care. Every motion, every glance, radiated a possessive tenderness that she had never experienced, yet now could not imagine living without. He leaned closer, the faint scent of him surrounding her, and for a moment, the world outside faded entirely. The palace, the pack, the whispers, they no longer mattered. There was only the room, the firelight, the child sleeping peacefully nearby, and the quiet storm of his attention centered wholly on her. Her lips parted slightly, words failing her. She could not explain the tumult inside, the fear, the awe, the strange longing that coiled like fire in her chest. All she could do was allow herself to be present, to feel the claim he laid upon her, tender yet absolute, possessive yet protective. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, fingers lingering against her cheek, and she shivered, caught between the need to step back and the desire to lean into the warmth of his touch. His possessiveness was no longer hidden, no longer silent. It was gentle, deliberate, and unwavering. He would protect her, guard her, and claim her heart in ways both fierce and intimate. The child stirred in sleep, murmuring softly, and she glanced down, relief and joy flooding her chest. The alpha's gaze followed hers, softening ever so slightly, a recognition of the life they were building together. She realized then that the possessiveness she had feared was, in truth, a sanctuary. His obsession, once a source of awe and terror, was now the shield that allowed her to breathe, to feel, to hope. She leaned into his presence, small and tentative, and felt the connection deepen, silent yet unbreakable. In that quiet, private moment, she understood the truth she had only begun to glimpse. She was claimed, fully and completely, and his heart, like hers, was tethered irrevocably to the fragile, precious life they shared. And in the flickering firelight, with the child sleeping peacefully nearby, she allowed herself to believe, just for a heartbeat, that this was a beginning, not just of protection, but of love, possessive and tender, fierce and unshakable. The morning sunlight poured through the tall windows of the nursery, soft and warm, catching dust motes that floated lazily in the air. For the first time in weeks, the room felt alive, not tense, not heavy with whispers or fear, but alive with laughter and quiet comfort. She knelt on the floor, tidying the scattered toys, the child giggling as a small wooden horse rolled between them. The sound was light, innocent, and it filled her chest with an ache she had not known she could feel, joy. The alpha's presence was near, subtle but unmistakable. He had not entered the room directly, respecting the delicate peace of the moment, yet she felt him in the soft pressure of the air, in the way the shadows moved with an almost conscious vigilance. She glanced up, catching the faintest hint of his dark gaze through the slightly open door, and her chest warmed. His protection was quiet now, unobtrusive, but absolute. The child squealed, small hands reaching for a bright ribbon, and she laughed softly, tucking the hair behind the little ears. "Careful," she murmured, "or you'll tangle it again." The alpha's watchful presence seemed to soften in that instant, as if he approved of the simple domesticity, of the tiny moments of happiness they had carved out together. He stepped closer then, silently, his movement fluid, calm, a shadow among shadows. The child noticed him immediately, eyes lighting up with the pure, unguarded joy only children possess. The small hands reached out instinctively, and the alpha's deep, commanding presence softened as he knelt, allowing the child to climb into his lap. For a moment, he let the laughter wash over him, letting the warmth of their bond fill the space between them without a word. She watched, heart swelling, as the child pressed close to him, resting a tiny cheek against his chest. She realized in that moment that the little one had never known fear here, not truly, because the alpha's presence created a sanctuary where trust could flourish. She, too, felt the peace settle over her, softening the edges of the constant vigilance she had carried like a shield for so long. "Do you see?" she whispered to herself, a quiet, incredulous joy in her voice. He cares for her. He's here, always." The alpha turned his gaze to her, dark eyes soft, almost tender, acknowledging her silently. There was no need for words, everything that had been unspoken between them, all the subtle confessions of devotion, protection, and claim, existed in that glance. The child giggled again, climbing down to chase the rolling horse, and she felt a flush of warmth as the alpha's hand brushed lightly against hers. Not possessively, not commanding, but reassuringly. The gesture spoke of partnership, of shared guardianship, of quiet acknowledgement that they were, together, responsible for this small, fragile happiness. She knelt beside them, brushing her fingers along the child's hair, and the alpha's eyes flicked to hers, a faint smile teasing the corner of his lips. There was a softness in that look, rare and precious, that made her chest ache with longing and relief. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that joy, real, safe, untainted joy, could exist in their lives. The sunlight shifted, bathing the room in gold, and the warmth seemed to settle deep within her. The child's laughter echoed, a constant, joyful reminder of why she had risked everything, endured every whisper, and survived every shadow. The alpha's quiet vigilance, his possessive care, his unwavering claim, had created something rare and beautiful. A home, a family, and a space where happiness could bloom. She pressed a soft kiss to the child's forehead, then looked to the alpha, heart full. For the first time, she felt whole, not merely protected, but truly seen, valued, and included in the life they were beginning to build. The stakes, the danger, the fear, they still existed outside the walls, but here, in this moment, nothing else mattered. The alpha stepped closer, his presence brushing against hers like a silent promise, and she realized that the future they had begun to carve was no longer defined by fear. It was defined by care, by devotion, and by a bond that had been forged in shadows and strengthened in quiet moments like this. The child's laughter, ringing bright and clear, was the music of their new life, a life where she, too, was allowed to be happy. The night air was heavy, thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth, as if the storm itself carried a warning. The palace, usually serene in its quiet hours, felt charged, every shadow deepened, every corridor holding a hint of danger. She moved cautiously, the child close at her side, clutching her hand as if sensing the tension she could barely name herself. The alpha was already there, waiting. Not in a position of ceremony or command, but in the raw, silent readiness of a predator who had smelled danger before it fully arrived. His gaze swept the halls, sharp and unrelenting, his presence a tangible wall of protection. She felt the weight of it in her chest, equal parts comfort and fear. There was no hesitation in him, only the controlled power that had always both awed and terrified her. They had been tested before, whispers, betrayal, separation, but this threat was different. It came not from politics, not from rivals, but from a force unseen yet undeniably lethal. An external enemy had breached the outer walls, moving with precision and intent. She could feel the tension in the air, the electric pulse of fear mingling with the alpha's readiness. He knelt, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and his voice, low and steady, cut through the tension. "Stay close. Trust me." The words were simple, but in them was the weight of command, the promise of protection, and the possessive insistence that she and the child were his responsibility above all else. The child clung to her, trembling, and she whispered soothing words, though her own heart raced. Every step they took together was measured, deliberate, each movement dictated by the alpha's careful guidance. There was no panic, only strategy, only the quiet rhythm of predator and prey, hunter and shield. The enemy moved swiftly, but the alpha was faster, his presence a storm contained in calm form. He intercepted the threat before it could touch them, the sound of his movement precise, lethal, controlled. She saw flashes, shadows bending, bodies forced aside, the faintest glimmer of steel, but the child remained untouched, the center of his protective orbit. Her chest tightened, awe and fear intertwining as she watched him. He did not shout, did not rage. He moved with quiet dominance, every action a declaration that nothing could breach the space he had claimed for them. And in that, she understood fully the depth of his possessiveness, not just desire, but an unbreakable commitment to safeguard them, regardless of the danger. The battle was brief, sharp, and decisive. By the time it was over, the enemy was gone, scattered, defeated by the precision and power of a man who had claimed more than just loyalty. He had claimed hearts, and he would not yield them to anyone. She sank to the floor, the child in her arms, trembling not from fear alone, but from the intensity of what they had just witnessed. The alpha stood over them, breathing steady, dark eyes softening only for a heartbeat as they met hers. No words were needed. The bond had been reaffirmed, stronger and more unbreakable than ever. She felt the tether between them tighten, possessive and protective, and for the first time, she knew there was no force in the world that could sever it. The storm outside subsided, leaving silence in its wake. She looked at the alpha, chest still pounding, and whispered softly, almost to herself, "We are unbreakable." He knelt beside them, one hand brushing the child's hair, the other resting lightly on hers, a quiet promise sealed in the stillness of the aftermath. Possessive, protective, unwavering. He had proven that no danger, no betrayal, no force could undo the bond he had forged in shadows, in silence, and in small acts of devotion. For the first time, she felt the weight of safety, of belonging, and of love that was claimed, visible, and undeniable. They were no longer merely surviving, they were together, unshakable, and truly, completely unbreakable. The palace courtyard was alive with movement and anticipation, yet she moved through it as though in a dream. The sunlight glinted off polished stones, casting long, golden streaks across the grounds. For the first time, she walked without fear, without hesitation, feeling the alpha's presence like a shadow at her back, ever watchful, ever possessive, yet comforting in a way that left her chest both warm and taut with anticipation. The child ran ahead, laughter spilling into the air, carefree and untethered. She watched, heart swelling, as the little one's joy seemed to ripple through the courtyard, touching every wary eye and every whispered doubt with a sense of undeniable truth. They belonged here, together. And then he appeared, stepping forward with the quiet command that had always silenced a room. The alpha's gaze swept over the assembly, pack members, servants, rivals alike, and the air seemed to thrum with his presence. There was no boast, no arrogance, only a power so absolute that every whisper died before it left her lips. He claimed the space, the day, and most importantly, her and the child. She felt the weight of his possessive attention, as tangible as the sun warming her skin. He approached deliberately, slow and measured, until she could feel the heat radiating from him. The child ran to him, tiny arms wrapping around his knees, and he bent to gather the little one, his hands gentle yet authoritative. Every motion spoke of ownership, protection, and the quiet thrill of claiming what was already his. Her own heart raced as he turned his gaze toward her, dark eyes locking with hers. She could feel the invisible tether tighten between them, a possessive claim laid bare for all to see. He did not need to speak. The depth of his devotion and the certainty of his protection radiated from him in waves, palpable and undeniable. Finally, he extended a hand, not just to guide, but to declare, to mark her publicly, visibly, as his. Trembling, she took it, feeling the electric charge of possessiveness, safety, and love mingling in a way that left her breathless. The alpha's hand was steady, firm, and warm, a promise that no one could challenge, no one could undo. The pack watched in silence, awe and respect settling over them. Rivals who had whispered, who had tried to divide or humiliate, bowed their heads, understanding fully that she and the child were protected by a power beyond reckoning. The alpha's possessiveness was no longer subtle, no longer hidden. It was claimed, undeniable, and unassailable. She pressed the child close, allowing herself a small, tentative smile. Tears pricked her eyes, not from fear or shame, but from the overwhelming relief of recognition. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer powerless. She was marked, claimed, and loved, fully, irrevocably, by the alpha who had always watched, protected, and possessed her in ways that transcended fear. The alpha stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and for the first time, he allowed the faintest of smiles, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond they had forged. Possessive hearts, tethered together, now visible to all. The child giggled softly, pressing against her, and she realized, with a fullness in her chest that she had never known, that their little family was complete. The sunlight shimmered across the courtyard, illuminating the trio, the alpha, the maid, and the child, an unbreakable unit, united by protection, love, and the quiet yet absolute possessiveness that had defined their journey. She felt whole, cherished, and finally, truly safe. As he gathered them together, she allowed herself to lean into his strength, feel the heat of his presence, and accept the love and claim that had always been hers, even when she could not see it. The world outside could whisper, doubt, or challenge. They were untouchable. Marked, claimed, and loved, they faced the future unbroken, unshakable, and undeniably theirs. The alpha's possessiveness, once terrifying and awe-inspiring, was now a sanctuary. And in that moment, with the child laughing and the sunlight warm upon her skin, she realized that everything, fear, longing, betrayal, despair, had led her here, to the place where she was finally, irrevocably, his.